and nationalizing whole industries. Yes, he is working with the healthcare companies, but don't you think those healthcare companies eventually will go out of business as the government takes over more and more?
Oh, yeah, it looks like that. They've taken over insurance companies already, so I think that definitely will happen. But we can expect the quality of care to go down, and the movement is in that direction. But, you know, Obama, on his appointees, they say, a lot of people say, well, they give the president sometimes a pass, and they'll say, well, he does this because it's his advisors and it wasn't him. But like you point out very, very correctly, whether it's me in my congressional office or the president making his appointments, we're responsible because we pick these people, you know. So he can't duck and say, oh, I didn't realize that he had these beliefs. He probably very well knew exactly what the beliefs are of every single person he's appointed. The
fact is that the American people are not giving him a pass anymore. They are saying you are now a socialist. 55%. By the way, again, I have to reemphasize, this is a Democratic poll. It comes from James Carville, the most Democratic Democrat around. So if Carville's saying it, you better expect it to be true. So how does the president get out of this? I mean, is this a label that he will not be able to duck for the rest of his presidency?
I don't see how he will. I mean, he could get up, and the more he denies it, the more attention it will draw. He's not going to fire all these people that he appointed that have these viewpoints, and I don't think he's going to change his viewpoints. And still, I will argue the case that possibly he doesn't have in his mind that he wants the government owning every single thing.
You know, you're giving him a pass that the American people. I'm surprised I'm hearing Ron Paul giving the president a pass on this.
Well, I think actually, if you understood what I mean by corporatism, it's a much worse system because it leads to fascism. What it is, I mean, in Germany, the business people still own their businesses, and you can't have a worse type of socialism as the German fascism did. So the word itself, I think it's a healthy word to identify what's happening. That's why I would slightly qualify in socialistic. Means he wants to take over and run things and take care of his buddies and bail out his friends. I mean, they're still involved with a system, a monetary system where they bail out banks and their friends. Right. That isn't pure socialism when they use this banking system in the Federal Reserve to bail out big banks and big corporations. So he's in the pocket of big corporations and big banks, and that's a form of authoritarianism. Well, which, just for me, it's a better description. And again,
a rose is a rose. The point is that politically it's a killer. This label, if he doesn't get out from under this label, it is really devastating politically. Congressman Paul, stay with us, please.
No doubt about it.
We want to bring in James Toronto. He is a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, has written about this. Also, Tim Carney of the Washington Examiner, who's also written about it. Tim, first to you. Now, you agree with Ron Paul, by the way, that socialist is the wrong term, right?
Well, I absolutely agree that corporatism is the right word. I mean, Congressman Paul said everything I was going to say, that it's a corporate socialism. Socialism isn't an incorrect word. There are better words. And frankly, I mean, George W. Bush made us more socialists than we were. He was the one who took over AIG through the Fed. He was the one who bailed out Bear Stearns and then did the TARP and started the Detroit bailout. So there are better words to use, I think.
Yeah, but again, James Toronto, this is the sort of thing that academics discuss at night, you know, whether it's corporativist or redistributionist or socialist. I mean, the American people have simplified the issue, I think, in a sort of an eloquent way by saying, look, it doesn't matter. The guy's a socialist. He doesn't agree with the economic ends that we do.
Well, you may be right. I wrote a column a week ago in which I said that calling the president a socialist is a gross exaggeration, and perhaps that just shows what an out-of-touch, liberal, mainstream media elitist I am.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As always you have been. But has this been picked up, by the way? One of the things James does, for those who don't know, is to study the blogs out there to find out what the internet chatter is all about. What are they saying about this poll?
It's getting a lot of attention. It's getting a lot of interest, especially among conservatives. But I want to go back. What's fascinating is how this has gotten into the mainstream, this idea that Obama is a socialist. There were a few polls that were done early this year in the winter and spring, one by the Daily Cause, although apparently there might not actually have been a poll there. He's now accused his pollster of making up the numbers. But and another one by Harris Interactive, which was inspired by a book by a fellow named John Avlon, who's arguing that conservatives are wingnuts, as he calls them, and also they shouldn't engage in name-calling. So these polls ask a series of questions that are designed to elicit, that are designed to show that Republicans are crazy. So they ask, do you agree or disagree with the following statements? And they're things like, Obama wasn't born in America, Obama is a Muslim, Obama may be the Antichrist, Obama is a socialist. So the idea that Obama is a socialist a few months ago was considered something that only right-wing lunatics believed. Now it's believed, apparently, according to this poll, by 55% of the American people. It's quite astonishing how this idea has moved into the mainstream.
Congressman, one thing that's interesting, while this label may be sticking to Obama, other labels for people that the mainstream media and others can't stand, like your son, for example, Rand Paul, they tried to label him as a racist by some of the comments that he made. That label doesn't seem to be sticking, does it?
Well, it's so extreme, and in that instance, it was based on a false charge, and, you know, it wasn't even correct, and there had to be apologies for misconstruing what he said. So you can go too far. And once again, I think you have to give the American people some credit. You know, I've been hit pretty hard in a lot of my campaigns, you know, over the various issues, but sometimes they were just extreme, and people who knew me in the district, they said, oh, we don't believe that. It just passes by them. So I think that is what happens, but it looks like in this case, like it was just pointed out, calling him a socialist seems to be pretty appropriate because it was the same percentage as said he was too liberal. So being too liberal and a socialist is very much the same, and I think that's probably a legitimate comparison.
Well, James, you were complaining about the term socialist before, and you said it's like, you know, you had these wingnuts on the left who were calling Bush a fascist during Bush's presidency, but you never had 55% of the American public believing that Bush was a fascist. At most, it was maybe 20% of the American public. This has gone beyond wingnut, the label socialist.
Yes, and Bush was not even arguably a fascist. There was nothing fascist about Bush's administration, right? There was no effort to silence opposition.
But what I'm saying is the effort to label Bush as a fascist cannot be similar to the effort to label Obama a socialist, because the American people never came up to 55%.
But this was the contrast I raised. I said calling Bush a fascist was a complete falsehood, whereas calling Obama a socialist is merely a gross exaggeration.
Or just a matter of opinion. Tim, what about what's happened to Rand Paul and other conservatives by the mainstream media? Their attempts to label them racist or something abhorrent have failed. They've fallen on deaf ears in the American public, have they not?
Well, and yes, they have, but it's incredible because this is all that I see the left talking about. I have a lot of liberal friends, and I always say, why is the most important thing to you to try to bring down Rand Paul or to try to bring down Sharon Angle when your party is in power and is doing, again, this corporatist stuff, is selling out the liberal base? But on the left, I think they're sort of averting their eyes from that and trying to sort of pick on people who have ideas that are easy to pick apart. And that's what's going on with Rand Paul and Sharon Angle.
Congressman Paul, by the way, I just want you to be assured that Scoreboard has many times pointed out the connections between the Obama administration and a lot of corporate entities like Goldman Sachs, like BP, for example. There was no bigger supporter of BP among politicians than President Obama.
Yeah, that's right. And, of course, we find out that BP was a strong supporter of cap and trade, so they're in bed with the government in many ways. So that's why this connection between big government corporations is the big and most serious thing going on right now. But the concern about socialism is real and realistic, and the people are interpreting it right, even though there might be a technical definition that we will have slight disagreement on. But I don't think that's really too important, because I think it's the direction of the country that counts. You know, when they ask that question, I mean, all these polls, are we satisfied with the direction of the country? And they are not satisfied. If they think we're going socialistic, believe me, simplistically, they say, wrong direction, change the party.
And, James, I think that's the point. You know, you will never find 100% of anything, whether it's capitalism, socialism. It depends on what trend you're directing towards. And clearly it's that trend that concerns the American public.
Well, right. And to some extent, when people say Obama is a socialist, it's their way of expressing disapproval for him. Just like, you know, when people say he may be the Antichrist or he wasn't born in America, that's why you get bigger answers to those questions among Republicans. It doesn't really tell you anything about what they believe, except that they don't like Obama.
James Tirana for the Wall Street Journal, Tim Carney, Washington Examiner, and, of course, Congressman Ron Paul. Great to see you all. Have a wonderful weekend. And actually, James is going to be coming back in just a moment. And we want to know what you think. President Obama is a Socialist. Is that declaration a buy, sell, or hold? Text 369-249. Coming up on deck, Colonel Peters is outraged at President Obama for